Hello, I'm Michelle Jones from Sonoma State University. My faculty mentor is Dr. Chingling, and this presentation is Understanding Discrit, the intersection of disability studies and critical race theory. We're going to get into a few key terms of disability studies and the differences between terms that we would normally use interchangeably, but which disability studies scholars believe have significant difference. Our first terminology distinction is between normative and normate. Normative implies a societal value judgment. Normative is the collective decision by a group of people, by a society, on a certain trait, deciding whether people who have that trait are fully functional members of society, deserve full rights, if they are good, bad, based off of that. Normate or normal, on the other hand, is the actual frequency of a trait itself. Now, someone who is normal or normate would have full use of their sight, full use of their limbs, full use of their hearing. So someone who is non-normal, non-normate would be subjected to society's normative judgments and normative value assessments and decided upon whether they are fully functioning, fully desirous persons within the society. Now, getting into the difference between impairment and disability, impairment is the actual physical, psychological, emotional, and so on condition itself. Disability is a social construct. It is how our societies have responded to those people with impairments, how we have made it possible or nearly impossible, in some cases fully impossible, for those people with impairments to fully participate within society. On the left, we have a person who is impaired. They do not have full use of their legs, so they need to use a wheelchair. But on the right, we have where they become disabled, where society has created a construct, an actual building in this case, which does not permit the impaired person to enter. There is no ramp, there's no chairlift, there are just stairs, and they are disabled from participating fully in society by lack of access to that building. We're going to go over a few historical examples of dual discrimination where disability and race have been used in combination to deny the rights and full personhood of groups of individuals. Native Americans prior to the early 1900s and into the 1900s were understood to be collectively and inherently disabled. There was actually a Supreme Court case which decided that Native Americans were rightly understood to be the wards of the government because they could not, like disabled people were understood at the time, could not take care of themselves, could not provide food and housing and shelter and protection and money for themselves, that they necessarily relied on the United States government to take care of them, much in the same way that disabled people were understood to be reliant upon the government. As we move into slavery, Dr. Samuel Cartwright discussed what he understood to be the physiological differences between white Americans and African American slaves, discussing how the slave actually had knees that were more prone to bending, in his opinion, and therefore they were just meant to be subservient, to be slaves, that it was their natural physical location to be the slave to the white master. And to justify slavery, people use the argument that freedom actually disabled the African American, that freedom was a negative contributor to the state and the health of the African slave. So they were able to promote slavery as protection, as the best thing possible for an African American person, because they were protecting them from becoming more disabled if they acquired freedom. Within the women's suffrage movement, while women were fighting for the vote, they accidentally used an ableist argument in order to acquire that right. Women were understood to have certain disabling factors, whether it was hysteria, the idea that the womb just wandered around in the female body causing madness, or just a frail constitution. Women needed to rebut these ideas of inherent disabilities. But in so doing, they actually argued that disabled people were not deserving of the vote, arguing that women were not disabled and therefore deserved the vote. At the same time, argued that those who had impairments, those who were labeled as disabled, did not deserve the vote and were not fully persons in the same way as women were. Now we're going to go over a few of the 7 tenets of Discrit. For time reasons, we're not going to go over all of them, but we will touch on some. Tenet 1 discusses how race and disability have been used interdependently to maintain a sense of normalcy for the dominant population. Tenet 2 builds off of that, discussing how groups are multiply minoritized. They are assigned multiple identifiers of minoritized groups, and this builds them into something that society can oppress with ease based off whatever is most palatable at the time. If it's most palatable to the hegemony to discriminate against racial minorities, they'll go off the factor of race. If it's most palatable for them to discriminate against the disabled, they'll emphasize the disabled factors that they associate with race or gender or sexuality or whatever other identifier they are currently using in conjunction with others to oppress a group. Tenet 4 discusses how Discrit values the voices and experiences of the multiply minoritized. Discrit believes that it is unethical and incomplete to assess the impact of multiply minoritization without hearing from the people who have been affected by being identified as different minoritized groups in order to be labeled as less than, as less fully persons. So a major part of Discrit is hearing from those groups and those individuals who have been multiply minoritized and valuing and forefronting their experiences in our discussions. Finally, with Tenet 7, Discrit requires activism and support from all forms of resistance. So this is getting into actually our final slide, the future of Discrit. So what is Discrit going to be in the future? What are the implications for future expansion of the discipline? Well, currently much of the discussion around Discrit is around special education, and this is an incredibly valuable discussion to have around how segregation of the races is being continued via the identifiers of disabled students. African American and students of color are being placed into special education programs at a disproportionate rate, therefore creating a continued segregation of the races along a different identifier. But Discrit is an interdisciplinary framework. It is something that can be applied to a lot of different disciplines. It's intersectional, it's broad, it has the ability to reach across the sciences and the humanities, and that's where Discrit is going. That calls back to Tenet 7, that there need to be activisms and resistances from all sources. We need to go back and look at the historical factors which have led us to the point that we're at now, from sociology, from literature, from science. Discrit is not restricted to one discipline. In fact, its biggest strength is that it is interdisciplinary and is that it can be an intersectional framework that reaches across the boundaries of our disciplines. And as we move forward with Discrit, as we continue to see that oppression is not singular, that identifiers that are used to oppress people are not kept within a vacuum, Discrit encourages the further exploration of other multiple minorizations, of how people are oppressed based off of the combination of identifiers such as gender, sexuality, race, economic status, etc. So finally, this is my works cited page of sources, and I really thank you for this opportunity to present this research, and I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session. Thank you.